Hey guys, it's Ted Bogert. We're back with the Ted Show. We have musical guests. You know I love musical guests. I absolutely love to showcase anybody who's got a talent, and apparently our gentleman right here, I know for a fact, has a talent. Nick Granville is on the show with us. What's up, Nick? A working musician. How are you?
I'm really well, thanks, Ted. Thanks for having me on.
I'm super excited. You know, guys, he's coming all the way from, can't make it up, New Zealand. It's 10 o'clock in the morning there, 4 o'clock here in Orlando time. We're very excited to have him on the show. We were talking about wine a little bit and, of course, music in general. The audience loves an origin story, Nick. They want to know about you. And I posted your bio as you sent it to me. You've got a lot going on. You have an amazing journey, I think. So share it with us. Share your journey. People like to know if you were born with a guitar in your hand or if that came later. They kind of like to hear how it all went down.
I'm definitely most comfortable with a guitar in my hand, that's for sure. My wife gives me a hard time because I never really go dancing or anything like that because I don't know what to do if I don't have a guitar in my hand. No, I mean, I was born and raised here in Wellington, New Zealand, so I've lived here my whole life on and off, done quite a bit of traveling around the world and stuff, but my stepfather was a guitarist and singer. He was Irish, half Scottish, so you can imagine what that was like. Yeah. My mother didn't even own a stereo. When we were, my mother raised us till we were about 10 on her own, and then my stepfather moved in when I was about 10 years old, maybe 9. Before that, I played piano a little bit, but stepfather played guitar, and I just loved guitar. I loved the sound of it. I loved the music that it was related to and all of that, so I started learning guitar, and it's kind of all I've ever done. I don't know how to do much else. So it's
but if you have the gift of it, so you took to it immediately. You knew that that was the instrument that you would be most comfortable with, that was your creative outlet.
Yeah, well, piano for me, when I played piano, it felt like I had to work really hard. Where as soon as I played guitar, it just something about it felt natural to me. So and I loved it, and I loved the music. I grew up playing blues and rock and a lot of that stuff, and my stepfather was really into the Beatles and Pink Floyd and those sort of bands, and he liked some jazz stuff as well, which kind of got me started on the jazz path, I guess you will. But it was more quite accessible jazz. It wasn't very extreme kind of stuff. And then I did a music degree. Was a degree, just become a degree at the time.
You got a music degree. That's big.
In those days, yeah, it was the most that was offered. You couldn't do any further than that in those days. So, but I really learned from the School of Hard Knocks. I got out and played every weekend since I was 15 years old. I was playing in pubs and bars and all that sort of stuff before I was even old enough to get in.
What was that like? Because you obviously, most people can say they want to play, but you obviously had such a driving fire and passion to play that you went out early on and did it. You must have been good enough to get those gigs, though. Yeah,
well, I think in a lot of ways it kind of found me more than I found it, if you know what I mean. It's sort of, so I guess for me, I guess I played a bit and maybe the right people heard me and sort of opened some doors, and from that led to the next thing. And then if you do a good job of that leads to the next thing. And I always had a longer term view with it, that playing in bars and all that stuff was never really the long term goal, but it was merely a stepping stone to get me on to doing the next thing, which I really wanted to do session work and studio work and that kind of stuff. And maybe I was about 18 or 19 when I got my first kind of serious session work, a lot of TV stuff and jingles and movies and that kind of stuff. And that kept me pretty busy.
What was that like as an 18-year-old? Because you're stumbling onto you're touching the little thing of stardom, or at least understanding what it's like to be in the TV production world.
It was really intimidating, to be honest, because the playing wise wasn't really that difficult, but it was more that, you know, here we were in the studio, there was serious money dropping every hour. There might be, you know, could be an orchestra there. So you imagine if you're paying everybody an hourly rate and there's 90 of them there, and you're in the guitar and I was only young, I could do the job or I probably wouldn't have been there, but some of those dates were pretty scary. So, and then the other ones were super easy. The other ones I went in and it was just me, and I'd be playing in the studio with a producer or whatever, and we'd play some stuff, and 3/4 of the things I never ever heard. Maybe they went out and you never ever saw it again, or you played on someone's record and it didn't have vocals at the time, so you had no idea how the song even went. I've had a few times
where you're honing your craft the whole time. You're honing your craft. You're getting used to. You're building that, because I mean, at 18, it sounds all glorious, but it's also a lot of work. So you're working through it. Did you figure out your path? Did you figure out the things that you wanted to do and the things you didn't want to do as far as your art was concerned?
I've always been someone who sets goals and tries to achieve them. So my first goal was to start doing pub gigs. Then my second goal was to start doing session work. Then my next goal was to release albums of my own. So I've done about 5 or 6 albums of my own. And then my next goal was to start working with orchestras and doing more of that kind of stuff and arranging for bands and writing for bands. And so I've always set goals and then tried to chip away at them and reach the next level with one. And then I wanted to tour internationally and do a lot more gigs and that kind of stuff. So that sort of happened. And yeah.
How did the album part go? Because that could be intimidating, that process. I mean, that's a big deal. People are depending on you. There's money invested, there's time. What was the first album like? Was it the experience you thought? Did the product end up being what you love? How did that work out?
Yeah, well, the first album I ever did was I took a band to a jazz festival, and we had five nights in a row. Every night we had concerts, and we had the day free. So I thought, well, I'm gonna write some music for these great musicians, And I remember the very first tune I wrote for that band. We played the concert that night, which was the first gig. We played the melody part of the song, and we hadn't even finished, and the audience just started clapping, and I was like, wow, okay, maybe there's something in this. And so by the end of the week, I had a bunch of material together and I had a band that could play it. So we recorded the last gig live, and then we came back to a studio in Wellington and planned to record it in the studio. But some of those tracks, we couldn't really get the same kind of energy or vibe. Well, it wasn't the best recording. It was, the music was right. So we did some new ones. We did some stuff with that, and that kind of came together. And there was a guy here, Rodger Fox, who had a record label who was very supportive, and he distributed the album. My music was less about kind of labels and more about me doing it and then having distribution on the end of it. So I was kind of the later part of that. Or the labels was kind of slightly before my time. That was back when I was doing session work. A lot of that was for labels and for people rather than for me. When I released my own music, it was more a self-driven thing by that point. So.
And how was the pandemic to you? What did you do? We get asked this question every time I have a musician on or an artist. How did you pivot? What did you do in 2020 to continue to be creative? And then tell us about what 2021 holds.
Yeah, well, New Zealand is in a very unique position, as I'm sure you're probably aware, because the media likes to pick up on our success with it. And it might seem like we're bragging, but we don't have the pandemic here at all. And I know the rest of the world, I feel so sorry for my friends overseas and stuff, my musician friends who are just, they're doing it rough. And so for us, what happened was our government decided that as soon as it got here, we had about 1,000 cases in the country, and it was spreading. It was spreading crazy quick. They just shut the whole country down, and they said, we're going to have a complete lockdown. Everything's closing except for absolute essentials, which is basically just supermarkets, so you could get food.
Right.
That for about 6 weeks, and the government actually paid everybody to stay home. You could access a subsidy to keep you going through that period, which worked out all right. I mean, it wasn't kind of what I was earning anyway, but it was enough to not die.
Correct.
Which is important. And so we did it tough. Like, it was a tough restriction. You were allowed to go outside to go for a walk, but you weren't allowed near people. You weren't allowed at the beach. You weren't allowed at nowhere. Swimming pools, everything was closed.
We stopped it.
And we stopped it, and it actually worked. Like, we got to the point where there was now no cases in the country. None in the community, nothing at the border, because the border was closed. And then they opened the border again, but only to New Zealanders coming home. And they keep catching it at the border. And we've had a couple of times where that sort of sneaked its way in, and there's been 1 or 2 cases, but they've managed to isolate that. And our biggest city, Auckland, they actually had another lockdown, a second one, because it got into the community and it was starting to spread. And then they went, right, we're just going to shut this down again real quick. Yep. And of course, there have been those who have tried to push it. You've had people who have tried to do it. So for that period of 6 to 8 weeks, I had all my gigs just overnight disappeared. I went from the diary being full to being absolutely empty. And then when that finished, after that, maybe for about the next 2 or 3 months, it was still super quiet. Like, nobody wanted to risk it. If it happened again, all of a sudden they have to cancel a festival or whatever it is. Nobody wanted to risk it. And then the end of the year, when things started moving again and people felt like, okay, maybe we're on a good side of this, it just went berserk. And I was ridiculously busy, probably the busiest I've ever been.
Isn't that great?
I love it. 7 gigs a week.
Wow.
So right through November and December. And then in December, I had 9 gigs a week for the last 2 weeks of Christmas. I basically just was doing 2 or 3 gigs a day every day. And it was,
do you have to slow down, really?
Not really. I mean, for a period of time it did. And then it was all back on again.
I'm happy to hear that, because you're right. I have artists on all the time. It was definitely a struggle, mainly to pivot, to try to figure out how you're going to stay alive and stay relevant and stay creative. Because you're shut down and you have no people contact. You can't perform for anybody. You can't really get together with anybody and songwrite, or at least in the old fashioned way. And so people had to kind of pivot, figure out how to use Zoom, how to figure out how to use all that good stuff to continue the creative process. I'm very happy to hear that you were thankfully only impacted shorter term than. It's definitely moving back to the States. I'm in Florida. There's definitely live music back again. We are seeing artists being able to do things just incredibly socially distanced, as it probably should be for us. All right, so tell us about your musical style before we dive into a song. How would you describe your genre, or are you all over the place?
I'm kind of, because I do a lot of session work, I'm kind of all over the place. I'm one of those guys that, I mean, I've got a gig coming up in a couple of weeks with an orchestra playing what I think is largely going to be classical guitar, which is totally out of my realm of what I normally do, but I do a little bit of that. I do jazz gigs, blues gigs, a lot of rock and a lot of rock and funk type music, and that's punk gigs not so much. I don't really get the calls for those. I was going to
say, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, I have done sessions doing that stuff, and even heavy metal and things like that. I've had sessions doing, because I can play a little bit of that, enough to do that. But it's but I think my heart mostly lies with jazz orientated music or blues, that kind of stuff. Any kind of music that has a deep, soulful kind of connection, then that's what I'm into.
I love it. All right, so I'm going to put you full screen, and then tell us what you're going to perform for us, please.
Sure. I thought I might perform a solo guitar version of In the Bleak Midwinter, which I know seems like it's a Christmas song, essentially. This is one I did for Kelly's record, the Iris record, in which we've been trying to organize this for a while, so this would have made more sense later on, earlier in the year.
I like the idea.
Yeah, so In the Bleak Midwinter, this is an arrangement I did for their album, but I'm going to play a solo guitar version of it, so it'll be a little different.
All right, Nick Granville, guys. So beautiful and mellow. All I could think about was, oh, now I'm relaxed.
Oh, thank you.
In a good way, like mellow, relaxed, happy. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Tell us again what the name of it.
It was called In the Bleak Midwinter. So it's an old tune, and I just did a different arrangement, some new chords and things. So I recorded it for Kelly's album, but there was more like a sort of a rock guitar thing. Whereas that doesn't work to play solo, so that's why I thought I'd play more like a solo guitar arrangement. So,
do you like doing different arrangements? It's probably pretty cool creatively, where you can pick up a piece and then kind of put your own spin on it.
Yeah, definitely. For me, that feels more like playing original music. It's not original music, but you can put your own stamp on it. And that it's funny enough, doing session work, people think that doing session work is just about turning up and reading a piece of paper down and then going home and putting no personality in it. And actually the opposite is true. Like most of the time I'm asked to come up with guitar parts. I turn up and someone has a rough idea of what they want, and it's quite creative. I have to be able to create something. I have to be able to do it quick. And often they tell you the very wrong thing. They say, we want some blues rock when really they want jazz, or they say, we want some sort of Bon Jovi type guitar part, or we're thinking heavy metal, and they're not thinking heavy metal at all. They just don't have the words to describe what they want. So I'll play stuff, and then I'll take another direction. Eventually I'll play something, and they go, oh, yeah, that's what I wanted. And you're like, okay.
I love it. Is there any artist that's your guilty pleasure?
Yeah, at the moment, I like lots of different music, as I mentioned earlier, and my daughter's really into this English singer, Dua Lipa, and she's pretty good. Her music's great. I mean, it's funky groove. It's pop, very pop, but it's kind of a throwback kind of music. Yeah, and I think her sound overall, it's pretty funky and groove orientated, and yet it's accessible. So I think she's great.
She's awesome. All right, Nick, how do people find you? How can we get your music? How can they find out more about you? I think when they do, they're going to go, wow, he's amazing, because that was beautiful. What's the best way?
Well, that song I played is actually on Kelly's album. It's the Blue Iris album called Joy. There's some stuff on YouTube of that album. I actually played guitar on that whole album, even though there was one feature song, but that's on the Blue Iris album. So if you see that on YouTube, my own original stuff is on Bandcamp. I tend to prefer Bandcamp over almost all the others. My last two records, which I put out, are only on Bandcamp. You can't get them anywhere else. No streaming, no, just Bandcamp. And I really like the Bandcamp model because it's high quality. You choose what you want to pay for it. They're free if you want. Because the most important thing for me is that I want people to listen to them. So if you go to Bandcamp and search out Nick Granville, surprisingly, most people will pay anyway, especially if they like the music. So it's worked out okay. It's worked out fine. But Bandcamp, I'm on Facebook, Instagram. There's a lot of my stuff on YouTube. So just Nick Granville, and you should be able to find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for getting up in the morning in New Zealand and coming on the TED Show. We appreciate you. NickGranville.com. Of course, you can find him on Bandcamp. Is that what you said?
Bandcamp. Yeah, that's where I have a lot of my music. So
I had not heard of that before you. So we're going to have to do some research on that. Not heard of that platform, but I love it. So we're going to have to educate the audience. But you can probably find that and find the link either on Nick's social media Google Bandcamp or go to nickgranville.com. Thanks, Nick, so much for being on the show. You were awesome.
Thanks very much.
All right, guys, we'll see you soon. Talk to everybody.